People usually ask the question, did the Christian church exist in the Persian or in the Arabian Gulf? If it exists, what happened? And how about today? What kind of a Christian church do we have in this region? But first, let us try to see whether the region, the Gulf, is called Persian or Arabian, or maybe simply the Gulf. In order to do that, we need to really navigate throughout the history to see whether the region should be named as Persian or Arabian or simply the Gulf. The Arabian or the Persian Gulf is located in Western Asia between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, is an extension of the Indian Ocean. It stretches across the southwest of Asia from 23 to 30 degrees northern latitude and 48 to 56 degrees eastern longitude. On the south side of Iran, it covers 1,259 kilometers. Large rivers like Karun, Zohre, Jarahimond, Dalki, Andijan, Kol, and Mina flow into the region from the Iranian side. Well, most of the people of the Arabian-Persian Gulf are Arabs, whose roots and ancestors go back generations. Arabic is the official language, though dialects distinguish one region from another. With the expansion of Islam in the 7th century AD, all of the countries in the area accepted the new religion. The nomenclature of the Gulf is controversial. Historically and internationally, it is sometimes known as the Persian Gulf, but also as the Arabian Gulf. Today, most of Arab states simply call it the Gulf. Iran, the largest country adjacent to these waters, and with a population of over 70 million, has designated the Gulf as the Persian Gulf throughout its history. However, modern scholarship and historical records going back at least 2,500 years to the time of the powerful Pars Empire agree on the name Persian Gulf. But the nationalism of most of the Arab countries, including the ones bordering the Persian Gulf, challenged the Iranian position and insisted on calling the Gulf the Arabian Gulf. The coup of Abdul Karim Qasem in 1958 in Iraq, followed by another by Baas, led to the claims for Iranian territory and the political decision by Iran to avoid using the name Persian Gulf for political reasons. Anti-Iranian feelings in the region reached new heights in the 1960s after Iran and Egypt ceased all diplomatic relations, and a similar anti-Iranian mood followed the Arab-Israeli War in 1967 because of Iran's previous support of Israel. The Islamic Revolution in 1979, however, together with the growing political and economic ties between the West and the Arab states, gradually increased Iran's isolation from the Western world, led to a general acceptance of Gulf as the Arabian rather than the Persian Gulf. The Gulf includes 6 countries, namely Bahrain, Kuwait, the Sultanate of Oman, Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. These 6 countries formed the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is known as GCC. It is headquartered in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, in 1981. The aim of GCC is to foster peace and security in the region and to develop economic relations between the member countries. The GCC is increasingly becoming an important entity in the Arab world and international world, assuming the role of an active political power broker in the region. The member countries of GCC hold a total area of around 2.5 million square kilometers and a total population of more than 40 million. It is headquartered in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The GCC launched a free trade zone in 1983. A year later, in 1984, the GCC member states signed a mutual defense pact and formed the Peninsula Shield Force, a unified defense unit. In an early implementation of this defense strategy, the GCC sent forces to Bahrain in March 2011 because violent riots in the kingdom jeopardized security in the region. The bilateral agreement between US and the GCC in the area of security is also an important and vital mechanism for the stability of the region. In 2003, the GCC established a customs union, and in 2008, a common market to better manage the petroleum industry of the GCC countries, which together contain 2/3 of the oil resources and production in the Middle East and North Africa. 55% of the world's oil reserves and 1/5 of its production globally. Of these countries, the economy in the GCC belongs to Saudi Arabia, while the richest country in terms of per capita GDP is Qatar. In 2010, the GCC countries were ranked as the easiest place to do business in the Middle East. According to World Bank sources, Saudi Arabia comes in at 13th place in the world in terms of business-friendly climate, while Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait and Oman rank 20th, 33rd, 39th, 61st and 65th respectively. According to latest statistics, the GCC countries belong to the top 139 countries with the most competitive economies. And it goes as follows. Qatar is the 17th, Saudi Arabia 21st, United Arab Emirates 25th, Oman 34th, Kuwait 35th, and Bahrain 37th. Among the factors driving the economic boom in the GCC countries, two are often cited. First, improved macroeconomic standing resulting from rising oil prices and sound policies such as business reform, investment in infrastructure, economic diversity, combating inflation, and improvement in educational system. Now, should we move ahead and start talking a little bit about Christian presence in the Gulf and give a historical overview? From the 4th century onwards, Christianity flourished in the Gulf. And even when it did not flourish, but only it survived, it remained a spiritual and cultural force in the right up to the present day. The Syriac sources of the Church of East, also known as the Nestorian Church, document the presence of monasteries from the mid-4th century onwards. These monasteries were located in northeastern Arabia, which included the Bahrain archipelago and the Qatar Peninsula, in two parts of a region known as Bet Qatariyya. Three of over 300 bishops who attended the Nicene Council, which took place in 325 AD, belonged to the Diocese of Bet Qatariyya, one of the most ancient dioceses in the Eastern Arabian Church. Today, this region is known as Oman, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. The Church of the East founded episcopal seats from the early 5th century onwards. Records indicate that the Diocese of Bet Qatariyya established an ecclesiastical province that lasted only for a short period in the mid to late 7th century. Metropolitan Ardashir, together with the Bishop of Bet Mazuniya, presently the Oman, led this province. After the invasion of Islam in 629 AD, the Christian community remained active in Bet Qatariyya, even though people in other places, such as the Bet Muzaniya province, converted to Islam. In spite of the fact that the Bishop of Bet Qatariyya did not attend synod after AD 676, documentary and archaeological evidence shows that the churches remained active till the late 9th century. One hypothesis about how Christianity reached the Gulf points to the arrival of Christianized Arab tribes who were in a close contact with Christian communities in HRAYR, which is central Iraq, and communities that also included a population of Tamim and Abd al-Qais, who are inhabitants of Bahrain in the northeast of Arabia. Research also suggests that Christianity spread through the missionary activities of the Nestorian Church, which is a split from the Western Syrian Jacobite or monophysite church in the 5th century. Scholars, however, point to the persecution of the Nestorians in Persia by Shapur II as a motive for Christians to migrate to the Gulf. The 1992 discovery of a church and a monastery, site dating back to 6th or 7th century AD on the island of Serbeniyes in Abu Dhabi, documents the presence of Christian community in the region. Archaeologists have found evidence of Christian pearl fishers around Bahrain and dated it to AD 835. Literary evidence from the last decade of the 9th century, namely the Patriarchal Chronicle of Mari, reports that Christians lived in the region of Yamama and Bahrain and enjoyed the favor of a local rebel leader. Other literary evidence indicates that Christianity flourished in the Gulf in the late 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, during which periods Christians and Muslims lived together in peace. According to a letter that Ishoyah III sent to separatist Metropolitan Simeon of Ardashir in AD 647, the threat to the church came from within the community rather than from Muslim conquerors. The insert from the letter shows his good relation with the Muslims, and I quote, "These Arabs, to whom God has given the empire of the world, are also, as you know, very close to us, and not just because they do not attack the Christian religion, but they praise our faith, honor the priests and the saints of the Lord, and award benefits to the churches and monasteries." I close the quotation. The church expanded in the late 7th or early 8th centuries, as shown by the foundation of the Al-Qusa church and the general toleration of the Muslim community. The monastery of At-Kharb documents the more active ministry of Timothy I and describes the 8th and the 9th centuries as the golden age of the Church of the East, a fact that is highly reflected in the archaeological records of the Gulf. From the 9th century onwards, we can see that Christianity is less evident in the life of the Gulf. Still, there were many Christians who chose to pay the jizya, the poll tax on non-Muslims, rather than give up their faith. According to Ishoyah III's letter to Simeon of Ardashir, other Christians in the region of Mazun converted to Islam in order not to lose their possessions and wealth. There are two schools of thought on the matter of Christianity's fate after the 9th century. One argues that the persecution and the slaughter of the Church of the East completely removed it from the Gulf. Proponents base this case on Prophet Muhammad's deathbed words, and I quote, "Throughout the peninsula there shall be no second creed." However, there is little to substantiate this case. In this period, Christians, together with the Jews, acquired the Dahimi status, which is a lower status than Muslims in the Islamic law, and they had to pay the jizya. But historical records indicate, and I quote, "slaughter on any scale by the Muslims at this time was unusual." Let's come to the second thought. The second school of thought links the disappearance of the Church of the East to the Greek Byzantine theology and philosophy that alienated Arab intellectuals and religious leaders and formed conviction that Islam had to protest that the real message of Christianity had been submerged by the subtitles of Byzantine dogma. The mass conversion of Christians to Islam seems to fit better into the scenario envisioned by the school. Controversies, Islam simply made more sense to them. The economic argument for conversion should, however, not be overlooked. Christians were restricted in their movements, and conversion meant better business and social network. Christian presence re-entered the Gulf with the first colonial ventures of the Portuguese, especially in Asia and Africa. This colonial era began with Vasco da Gama, who sailed from Portugal on July 8, 1497, in search for trade routes that passed through Muslim and Ottoman-controlled countries. The Portuguese arrived at Khor el-Fakhan in the Gulf around 1506. Crane describes the tragic events that unfolded there, where Captain Alfonso de Albuquerque's ship dropped anchor at its shores. And I quote, "When his fleet," Captain Albuquerque's of course, "reached Khor Fakhan, crowds gathered on the beach, beating drums and shouting. Horsemen galloped up and down the beach, and spectators climbed atop the town's walls and hills behind to see their first glimpse of the European visitors. Albuquerque and his men peered at the spectacle from their decks and decided that Khor Fakhan's reception wasn't submissive enough. The Portuguese waded ashore, unsheathed their swords, and began hacking off noses and ears, bayoneting men, capturing or killing women and children, and putting the torch to every one of Khor Fakhan's handsome houses with their lemon and orange trees and horse stables." And I close the quotation. The Portuguese, motivated by a strong anti-Muslim animus, their heritage from a day when Muslims dominated the Iberian Peninsula, invaded Arabia and built forts in Oman and Bahrain, and established a base in Hormuz on the Persian side of the Straits of the Gulf. The Portuguese offered protection to Catholic Carmelite mission activities. Later on, we can see the Dutch Protestants from the Dutch East India Company, chartered in 1602, succeeded the Dutch Protestants. A thinly squeezed Catholic-Protestant religious rivalry stoked the tough competition among Western powers in the East. After the Portuguese colonial era, we come to the British colonial era. And the British occupation of the Red Sea, the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq and Iran began in 1600 with the establishment of the East India Company. And in order to protect their lines of communication, the British destroyed the Portuguese base in Hormuz on the Persian coast in 1622, and from then on began competing with the French Company of East Indies. The French competition with the British and the Dutch sparked a more active Catholic missionary enterprise in the region and the world. The Gulf first encountered Western European Christianity when the Portuguese arrived in 1506. The Arab memory of the indiscriminate killing of women, children, and the old, and the mutilations inflicted on their prisoners by the Portuguese became engraved in the minds of the Arabs living anywhere between the Red Sea and the Persian coast, and were remembered as, and I quote, the deeds of the Christians. The violent spirit of the Portuguese colonial era led during the British colonial times to a period when breach builders like Captain Thomas Peronet Thompson succeeded in signing a treaty with the Trucial Straits. Captain Thompson's military regime inspirited so much confidence among the Arabs that they decided not to attack the British forces. The captain was regarded as, and I quote, a person invariably cautious to the sheikhs, and he even attempted to convert them to Christianity and obtained a small supply of Bibles in Arabic for them. In this, he made no headway, and several sheikhs wrote to him expressing their contempt for his religion. Thompson's affection for the local rulers led the Arabs of the coast to be tolerant toward Christians. So strong were the ties of friendship, he even obtained permission to use a mosque for church parades. And I close the quotation. Captain Thompson, a man of deep Christian convictions, spoke against the slave trade. Because he spoke Arabic well, he communicated directly with the local Arab leaders, the only British leader to do so. After the British era, the next phase will be the American Arabian Mission. This was a Protestant organization that operated in the Gulf and southern Iraq, and it was established in 1889. In 1894, the Reformed Church in America took over the mission, but formally dissolved it in 1973. The missions program included medical and hospital services in Bahrain and as early as 1905 and school for boys. The mission built the first proper hospital building in Kuwait in 1913. The successor institutions for the schools and the hospitals continue to exist in Kuwait, Bahrain and Oman, and even after the mission ceased its activities in 1973. In his analysis of the mission ministry in the Gulf, Al-Tamimi indicates that the preaching of the gospel in any visible or conventional sense bore no fruit since no indigenous Christian community emerged. While the missionaries received general praise for their contribution to the fields of medicine and education, as well as for their introduction of many of the amenities of modern life, they failed to convert people from Islam to Christianity. And HRAYR pinpoints the reasons why missionaries could not convert people from Islam to Christianity. And I quote HRAYR. Arabs, he says, believed that by becoming Christians, they will not only be cut off from the rest of society, but also change their allegiance. Nevertheless, one should acknowledge that the missions ministry has laid a foundation for the future, since thousands of travelers, businessmen and migrants from the Middle East and other places arrived in the Gulf, and some of them established churches. But the fact remains that conversions among the locals are not documented. While there is no one good explanation for this particular failure, Scudder proposes that the mission's success lay on another plane, namely the missionaries' remarkable success in winning the acceptance of the local populations. The missionaries managed to build their service institutions based on this acceptance. In this respect, the mission work they did showed their Christian philanthropy and devotion. The latter characteristics had a great impact on society, which remains tangible, and I quote Scudder, years after their metamorphosis or demise. Presently, there are more churches in the Gulf than people usually know about. All the 5 mainstreams of Christianity are represented in the Gulf today: the Oriental Orthodox, the Eastern Greek Orthodox, the Catholics, the Anglicans, and the Protestants. The main church is an expected phenomenon, with Asian constituting a majority. We need to acknowledge, though, the officially recognized status of the small local Christian communities in Kuwait and Bahrain. The largest group of Christians in the Gulf is made up of Indians. The Syriac Orthodox Church, Martoma Church, the Church of South India, have large congregations that worship in Telugu, Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada, and English. Migrant workers from India and the Republic of Philippines worship in Catholic and Protestant congregations. Inuit workers from Kerala have established a strong Malayali-speaking church community. On the other side, we can see Indian Pentecostal Church and the New Testament Church also boast very active, large congregations. Members of the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church are active in the Gulf, and for decades they speak Arabic, and which gives them an immediate access to the local Muslims in terms of language and culture. The Catholic Church constitutes the biggest Christian community in the Gulf. A semi-official statistics has shown that around 5 million of Christians are living in the Gulf today. The exact census is difficult to obtain because the number of migrants changes constantly. Laborers usually stay for a few years and then return to their native countries when their work contracts expire or they find new work contracts elsewhere. This is also a major feature of the churches and denominations in the Gulf. Christians have one foot in the home country and one in the host country. Certainly, such a context poses serious challenges to the mandate of the Christian community in the Gulf. The church tries its best to cater to the spiritual needs of its congregation, something the authorities are comfortable with, as long as it is done within the walls of the church compound. Another challenge is what Graham calls forced ecumenism. Because Christian churches and denominations are not allowed to own any land in the Gulf, they usually rely on the government to give them a piece of land to build a church on. This privilege is not granted to all churches and denominations, which means that different church traditions and congregations share the same space. At times, this forced ecumenism has and still produces some wonderful examples of cooperation as congregants learn to live together with a shared voice in an effort to foster better relations with government officials and to seek a fruitful ministry among migrant workers. At other times, these arrangements led and still leads to fierce internal tensions and impedes cooperation among churches because of differences in priorities among those seeking to remedy financial or legal, social, and religious needs. Thompson, an Anglican priest in Abu Dhabi, sees a change in mindsets. And I quote, "With many church buildings coming up, people can see that the Christians are to stay in the country. The potted plant is being lifted out of the pot and being planted firmly in the soil. The church's key function," and according to Thompson again, "is to engage more purposefully with the expatriate communities and at the same time the locals. To achieve this," he asserts, and I quote again, "there is a need to educate and equip Christians to live their lives with an integrity and authenticity that is rooted in the scriptures." It goes without saying that all these perspectives reinvigorate the ancient concept of the religious other, and in so doing create a condition for the possibility of understanding the religious other and building common interest with the other that are rooted in the scripture. The Christian church in the Gulf, it is indeed an expatriate church. Having said that, does the mission and the ministry of the expatriate church differ from the so-called local church? Moreover, how and who do we label and define expatriate versus local in an ever-changing demographic, social, and political context of today's world, and in light of the great advancement in today's globalized technology? The Arabian Gulf, the Persian Gulf, or the Gulf, call whatever you want, Christian presence in the most unlikely places, but with an equally same mission challenge like any church in the rest of the world. And that is to understand and relate with the other and to continue its ministry in building the spirit that is rooted in the scripture. Thank you.